Good morning, friends. We've been talking about the absolute necessity for Christians to rely completely upon the power of God to work in their lives, to live as the Lord has called us to live. And we've seen that it can be quite easy to experience doubt and fear about all this. Even with God's help, we ask, can I really make progress in sanctification? Can I actually say no to sin and yes to righteousness? Can I both discover and accomplish the work that God has prepared for me to do, whatever it might be? And so today I just want to draw our attention once again to the Lord's perfect track record in terms of his power and the application of his power. Because from Sunday's passage in Ephesians 1, the Apostle Paul reminds us that the very same power of God that is available to us, his children, it's the very same power that raised Jesus from the dead. It's the very same power that affirmed Jesus as the Son of God. The very same power that set Jesus on the throne of God, seated at his right hand, where he reigns in absolute authority over all of time and space. Therefore, if God can do those things in the might of his power, then how can we doubt his power and ability to work in our lives? And while those examples that we gave Sunday that I just kind of rehearsed now are some of the ultimate examples of God's power, let's look at just one more example, just to round things out. And there are so many more that we can look at. The scriptures, both Old and New Testament, are just completely full of examples of God acting in power for his own purposes and on behalf of his people. But for today, just one more story having to do with King Jehoshaphat. Because after the death of King Solomon, the nation of Israel had a time of civil war and ended up splitting into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom retaining the name of Israel, and the southern kingdom having the name Judah after the principal tribe that remained there. Unfortunately, every last king of Israel, the northern part of the nation, after that split, every one of those kings was a wicked king. And of the kings in the southern kingdom of Judah, there were only a few good ones. But Jehoshaphat was one of those quote-unquote good ones, one of the faithful kings. And so even as Israel is split in two, neither kingdom was particularly faithful to the Lord, but Jehoshaphat does remain as an example of a king who was looking to the Lord. And I want to show you how that ended up for him today. Because in 2 Chronicles 20, we read that a vast enemy army made up of actually three different enemy nations, all allied together, were coming against Judah. And it was going to destroy Judah. And Jehoshaphat calls a kingdom-wide fast. He calls all the people together. And in front of them all, he prays to God for help. And the reason this is important to us is because it shows Jehoshaphat's humility, because he was the king. And as king, he was supposed to have all the answers. He was supposed to lead the people to victory. But when word comes of this vast enemy fast approaching, he gathers all the people of his kingdom together and directs them not to trust in himself, but to trust in the Lord. And in his prayer, he literally says, "O our God, will you not execute judgment on our enemies? For we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." And again, in any other situation, this might be political suicide. Because if the king says, "I don't know what to do," especially publicly like this, then the people might decide to get rid of him in favor of someone who does claim that they know what to do. But Jehoshaphat doesn't care about the political ramifications of his prayer. Rather, he knows the truth, that he doesn't know what to do about this overwhelming enemy. He knows that neither he nor the kingdom as a whole has the power to repel the enemy. And so in the presence of all the people, he puts all his trust and hope in the Lord. And the Lord's response is incredible, because through one of the prophets, God says, "Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed at this great horde, for the battle is not yours, but God's." And then God tells Jehoshaphat to take his army out to face the enemy the next day, specifying where he's going to find the enemy and so on. And then he also says, "You will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord. Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, and the Lord will be with you." So God promises that he will fight the battle for them, that he will win the victory for them. And yet God still tells Jehoshaphat to take his army out to the field of battle. To still go out, prepare yourself in the normal way, don your armor, carry your weapons, form up in your units, march to the battlefield. And when you get there, do not be dismayed, do not fear, but hold your position, steel yourself. And so even though God promises that it will be by his power that the enemy is defeated, again, we have this idea that God still expects his people to take an active role in that whole process. And what ends up happening as we continue to read? Well, before the army of Judah even arrives on the scene, God throws those three enemy allied armies into confusion and deceit, such that they turn on each other and essentially massacre each other right down to the last man. Which means that when Jehoshaphat and his army do arrive, all they see is this battlefield of dead bodies, and the only thing left for them to do is to pick up all the plunder from the battle. They didn't have to fight anybody. All the enemies were already dead when they got there. And all they had left to do was just benefit from it. And it took them 3 days to gather all the spoil, all the booty, all the valuable items that the enemies had on them. And so we see in this account how complete reliance upon the Lord led to God displaying his power in such an incredible fashion. And God not only gave his people victory over the enemy, saving them from what otherwise would have been complete annihilation, but God blessed his people by handing the enemy's possessions into their hands. They went out to battle and came back not only alive and healthy, every last one of them, but they came back richer than when they went out. And how is this possible? Because of the power of God, which fought and won the battle for them. And again, we see that they were themselves active in obedience to the Lord. The Lord would give them the victory, but the people still needed to present themselves on the field of battle, not sure exactly how God would deliver the victory. Because as it ended up being, and God did tell them this beforehand, that they would not even need to fight on this occasion, there had been plenty of times before in the history of God's people, in terms of physical battles and such, that God did give them the victory, and yet the people did actually have to engage in battle. And yet God gave them the power and the ability and the skill to have victory as they fought the battle, which just reminds us that God does things in the manner that he chooses to do them. Sometimes he just hands us the victory, like in Jehoshaphat's case. Sometimes we have to fight, at least in a spiritual or metaphorical sense. And God grants us the strength to do so skillfully, thereby securing the victory in that way. But in either case, it is God's strength that wins the day, not our own. And so consider these truths and so many other accounts we see in the scriptures where we see that when God's people simply trust in him, he gives them victory. And not only victory, but glorious victory and great blessing besides. With that, I pray you have a good and godly day. And Lord willing, I'll see you soon.